William Willimon says that when he was a boy, growing up in Greenville, South Carolina, back in the 50s, there used to be a regular traffic jam at 9:45 on Sunday morning as all the Christians in town tried to get to their respective Sunday schools. That doesn't happen much anymore. We don't have a lot of Sunday school traffic jams, but you may have run into an Easter Sunday traffic jam this morning, and especially this year, because this year Protestants, Roman Catholics, and Orthodox Christians are all celebrating Easter on the same day. It's not because we've been suddenly seized by some yearning for Christian unity. It's just because this year all of our complicated Easter calculations brought us to the same conclusion. Orthodox Christians, for example, celebrate Easter on the first Sunday after Passover because they know that Jesus went up to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. It was sometime during that week that he was crucified. It only makes sense that he rose on the Sunday just after Passover. The rest of Christianity began with the same premise, but instead of tying Easter to Passover, they tied it to the first Sunday after the first full moon after March 20th. I don't know why. A fixed date on the Julian calendar. Now, some of you who know about that calendar know that it wasn't exactly accurate. And over the centuries, Easter was pushed from early spring until sometime in the middle of the summer. And that just wasn't right. Something had to be done. So in 1582, Pope Gregory XIII had the calendar revised, added the idea of leap year, and changed the celebration of Easter to the first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox, putting it right smack dab in the middle of the pagan celebration of spring. It wasn't the first time the church had done such a thing. Christmas, as you know, has little or nothing to do with the date on which Jesus was actually born. It's celebrated on what used to be a pagan winter solstice festival called the Birthday of the Unconquered Sun, S-U-N. The church simply adopted the existing festival, baptized it, and changed it from a festival of the S-U-N to a festival of the S-O-N. In the same way, Easter has little to do with the day Jesus actually rose from the dead. It is celebrated at a time of year when darkness is overwhelmed by light, when the cold days of winter give way to the warm days of spring, when the world that seemed dead and gone miraculously comes to life again. It seemed like a good time to celebrate the resurrection. And so once again, the church simply adopted an existing pagan festival, baptized it, and changed it from a festival of the blooming spring to a festival of the risen King. The church is always doing this kind of thing, always taking over pagan holidays and converting them to Christianity, whether they want to be converted or not. But I confess to you that even if we recovered the actual date of the resurrection and started celebrating Easter then, there would always be some pagan part of me that celebrates the first warm day of spring. And especially this year. It has been a long winter. I had hoped that when I moved from Washington, D.C. to Richmond, Virginia, it would be the end of long, cold winters. Richmond is 2 hours south of Washington, after all, and overflowing with warm southern hospitality. Last year wasn't so bad, but this year winter came with a vengeance. Not only here, but everywhere. I heard someone say that at one point there was snow on the ground in 49 out of 50 states. Friends and family in South Carolina were shivering in the cold. Relatives in Texas were complaining of the bitter days. And I was reminded of just how drafty a big, old house can be, spending most of my evenings bundled up in bulky sweaters and sipping hot tea. It reminded me of that last really cold winter we had while I was still in D.C., the one that made moving south seem like such a good idea. I still have some memories from that winter that I can't seem to shake no matter how hard I try. For example, one day I rode the bus to and from work, coming home after rush hour when the buses run far less frequently. I stood at a bus stop on Military Road for more than half an hour while the wind knifed through me and whipped around me and chilled me to the bone. On another day, I layered up and went for a run through Rock Creek Park, leaving my footprints in several inches of snow, crossing icy bridges over frozen pools and blowing warm breath into my red, numb hands. And then one day in early March, it got to be too much for me. I was walking back to my office from the DuPont Circle metro station, and a cold rain was falling. I had remembered to wear my raincoat and had it buttoned up to my chin, but I had forgotten my umbrella. So before I left the metro station, I pulled a newspaper out of the recycling bin and held it over my head. That's how I walked down Massachusetts Avenue, with the cold rain falling hard all around me, my newspaper getting soggy, my shoes filling up with water until I could hear them squish. And so when I saw the flag of Trinidad and Tobago flapping wetly in front of the embassy, I couldn't help myself. I went up the steps and in through the door, and I said to the woman behind the desk, tell me, what is the weather like in Trinidad today? She smiled like a little girl holding a cookie she isn't planning to share. 82 degrees and sunshine, she said. I looked up at that poster on the wall behind her head. There was a young couple frolicking in the surf, smiling, wearing bathing suits, while the sun bore down on those sparkling blue waters and the heat waves shimmered as they rose from the sand. And there I was, shivering in my shoes, dripping on the hardwood floors of the embassy, holding my soggy newspaper in one hand and trying to get up the courage to go back out into that miserable day. I was dying for some warmth and sunshine. It occurred to me later that some people walk into church like I walked into that embassy that day. Because it isn't just winter that gets us down. Winter is, in many ways, a metaphor of that most depressing reality of all, the reality of death. When the leaves fall off the trees in autumn, when the branches go bare and the grass turns brown, when the green stems of flowers have become thin black sticks, it reminds us of our own slow descent toward death. And we want some word of hope. We want to know that our lives will not end like the life of a leaf tugged by gravity, dead and dry, down to the cold, cold ground. So we stagger up the steps of the church and say to the preacher, tell me that there is more to life than this. I remember the first time I became conscious of my own mortality. I was in my early teens. My grandfather had come to live with us after the death of my grandmother, and he had become quickly feeble, as if she were the only thing he had been living for.